My name is Margaret. I'm 52 years old, and life has not turned out the way I expected. My husband, Robert, passed away 2 years ago. He was a kind man, but distant, always lost in work or his own thoughts. When he was gone, I thought I would spend the rest of my years in silence, gardening, attending family gatherings, reading in the evenings. That summer, Daniel came to stay with me, Robert's nephew, a 23-year-old man filled with restless energy I couldn't quite understand. He had just returned from the city where he had spent several years, and now he wanted to live in the countryside, away from the noise. At first, he kept to himself, wandering through the woods, reading on the porch. But slowly, we started talking about everything and nothing at the same time. He had a way of asking questions that made me feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. One afternoon, I was struggling with the old, creaky fence in my garden when Daniel offered to help. He worked silently, but intently, and I couldn't help but notice how different he was from Robert. Where my husband had been withdrawn, Daniel was present, engaged in the moment. The days passed, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations. The air around him seemed lighter, filled with possibilities I hadn't felt in a long time. One day, as the sunlight filtered through the trees, I decided to tackle the attic, a project I had put off for years. Too many memories, too much dust. I tied my hair back and began sorting through old boxes. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his shirt clinging to his skin from the summer heat. Need help? He asked with a slight smile. Before I could answer, he stepped forward, lifting a heavy trunk as if it weighed nothing. Careful, I said. That thing is probably older than both of us combined. He laughed, setting the trunk down gently. Good thing I'm here then. We continued working and stumbled upon a box of photographs. I smiled, showing him pictures from my younger days. He studied them carefully, his green eyes thoughtful. You were beautiful, he said softly, holding a photo of me in my 20s. I scoffed, waving off the compliment. That was a long time ago. It doesn't matter, he replied, his gaze lingering on the image before meeting mine. There was something unspoken in his eyes, something unmistakable. The air in the room thickened, as if something had shifted between us. I looked away, focusing on the box in front of me. These things, they're just reminders of a life that feels so distant now. Daniel moved closer, his voice quieter. Maybe it doesn't have to feel so distant. I froze, unsure of what to say. His words hung between us, carrying a weight I didn't know how to bear. Margaret, he murmured, his hand brushing mine as he reached for another photo. Life doesn't end when someone we love is gone. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, letting his words settle into me. That night, the house felt quieter than usual. Daniel had gone for a walk, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat on the porch, a cup of tea in my hands, watching the sun dip below the horizon. My mind kept circling back to our conversation in the attic, to the way his words had stirred something inside me. When he returned, his cheeks were flushed from the cool evening air. He sat across from me, his expression thoughtful. Are you all right? He asked, breaking the silence. I nodded, though I wasn't sure. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about not having to be alone. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I didn't mean to push, he said gently. I just, I see how much you carry, and I know what that feels like. His words surprised me. You do? He nodded, his face serious. Loss changes you. It makes you feel like you have to hold everything together by yourself. But you don't have to, Margaret. You don't. There was something so sincere in his voice, almost pleading. And for the first time in a long while, I started to believe him. The weight on my shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. In the days that followed, our conversations deepened. He told me about his childhood, his dreams, the things that had made him feel lost. I shared stories I hadn't spoken aloud in years. One evening, as we watched fireflies dance in the yard, he asked, "Have you ever thought about starting over?" I turned to him, puzzled. "Starting over?" "Yeah," he nodded. "Letting go of the past and finding something new. Someone new." His words caught me off guard, but I didn't look away. "I don't know," I admitted. "I always thought it was too late for that." "It's never too late," he said softly, his gaze steady. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon. We were stuck inside, and I was sorting through old books when Daniel entered the room. "Need help?" he asked, his voice warm. I smiled. "Sure. These can go." He knelt beside me, our hands brushing accidentally. It was a fleeting touch, but it made me realize I was still alive. "Margaret," his voice was low, almost hesitant. I looked up, meeting his gaze. There was something there, something that made my heart race. Before I could speak, he reached for my hand. "You're not alone," he said. "Not anymore." And in that moment, the walls I had built around myself started to crumble. In the days that followed, I realized something had changed between us. We had crossed an invisible line neither of us had expected. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled around us, we paused in a small clearing in the woods. "Margaret," he said softly, "I don't know where this road leads, but I know I don't want to walk it without you." I squeezed his hand, allowing myself to believe in something more. "Together," I whispered, smiling, and in that moment, I understood. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. The future, it was still waiting ahead.